Hey,
Hey,
Wild Willie, I presume.
yep,
How's it going?
good. How are you?
Oh, doing great.
That's good. Hi guys, welcome back to Wild Willie's Book Reviews. Today I'm with G-Man, also known as Gordon Korman. So is there anything you want to say about yourself?
It is amazing to be on Zoom with the famous Wild Willie.
Today I have a few of your books, On the Run 2, The Fugitive Factor, Go Jump in the Pool, I Want to Go Home, On the Run 3, Now You See Them, Now You Don't, and I'm in the middle of reading war stories.
Cool.
So, is there anything that really inspired you to get started writing?
Well, my first book was actually my grade 7 English project, right? So it was sort of a weird story, almost by mistake. When I was in grade 7, the track coach had to teach English just because they ran out of English teachers. But the way our schedule was set up, the only adult who was available to cover our class was this coach, right? So nice guy, good teacher, but he never taught English in his life. And when it came to creative writing, he just sort of didn't know what to tell us to do. And he drew a blank. And he stood there and said, okay, uh, work on whatever you want for the rest of the year. Seriously, it was February. So from February to June, we had a class period every single day to write one thing. And that's how I wrote my first book. At first, I started working on it in class time. Uh, but then the story sort of took off, brought it home, started working on it at night, and really kind of took off. And that's how I wrote my first book. And
So,
that was This Can't Be Happening at McDonald Hall.
so, is there anything that you kind of realized that you kind of started like during a school project, but is there anything that you realized after you started to continue writing that there was anything a little bit different about what you did?
I mean, I don't know. There's plenty of writers, right? I mean, I love telling stories. I mean, I never got better marks in school in math and science than English. I'm sorry, like I said that wrong. Like I always got better marks in math and science. So I kind of figured I would be more of a science guy or a tech guy. Um, but I always loved telling stories, particularly humor, right? I love jokes. I love making people laugh. So I think also I'm an only child. So when I was a kid, I used to get bored a lot. And one of the ways I kept myself entertained was just by making stuff up, right? I mean, think about it. Like, what's my job now? I make stuff up for a living. So I think that sort of creative, that sort of love of being creative and making stuff up started for me even before that grade 7 English project.
So when you wrote your first book and it kind of took off, did you think or even know right then that writing would kind of be your thing and you wanted to continue writing?
Um, so at first, when my first books came out, I was still in high school, and I I knew I liked it, but I always sort of thought it would be more like my hobby. It wasn't until I was in university. I was actually a film major, right? Like I wanted to be a movie director, and I was kind of bad at it. I just was not. I wasn't a visual artist. I couldn't like hold the camera steady enough, and so I was probably about 20. And by then, I'd written a few books. They were getting kind of famous. Like I was really developing kind of a great audience. And I thought, this should be my job, right? Like that's kind of when I first decided that writing would be my real career.
So did like when you were growing up, did you always kind of like writing, or did you kind of just find that you liked writing like when you were kind of bored and like when you were in school, or was like whenever you started reading, you knew that you kind of liked writing?
I mean, I think I always had a knack for creating stories. I loved stories. Um, you know, like on TV when they're saying things like, "Oh, this is based on a true story," or you know, ripped from the headlines. Like I never cared about that. I kind of preferred it that some guy made it up, you know. So I always had this kind of appreciation of making stuff up, being creative, inventing. You know, it wasn't sort of a spare time. I guess for me, like my first book was a school project, right? And the reason why I wrote my second book, I think you should Go Jump in the Pool. That was my overall second book. Was I kind of wanted to prove I could do it again. You know, prove that that first one wasn't a fluke. And it just sort of went from, you know, school project to hobby, you know, when I was in high school, to like summer job, and eventually when I graduated university, it was just my real job. Not because I had to start it, because I was already doing it. It was just kind of a no-brainer for me because I was already writing books.
So when you started writing Go Jump in the Pool, did you think you kind of had an idea of where you wanted to go with it? Or did you kind of just, like you said, you had an appreciation for people like making stuff up. Did you kind of just have a faint idea and just went from there?
Well, I'm kind of a planner, right? So for me, like I don't need to plan out like every chapter or every scene, but before I get started writing a book, I want to know beginning, middle, and end, right? Like I want the beginning. I may not know exactly the ending, but I might know the kind of ending that I want. And then what I want is maybe 2 or 3 kind of big scenes in the middle. And that way, if I ever get lost, I'm not like totally making it up as I go along. I've got some kind of an outline that I can kind of come back to. So I'm not winging it. I'm definitely planning it out.
So when you were starting to write series, like I know you have a bunch, like for example, On the Run, and there's a lot of others. Did you kind of think that you were going to write more series, or did you kind of like just writing like one book and then moving on to a different type, or did you always like writing series?
So it's both for me, right? Like I have some series that were always going to be series. Like the On the Run series was planned out from the very beginning. It was a 6-book series. If you look at the first contract, it was a 6-book contract. But then there are other series like Bruno and Boots, right? Like McDonald Hall, where I just kept writing one book at a time, and it sort of turned into a series gradually. Another good example of that is Swindle, right? So I always expected Swindle would be a standalone, but then I got a good idea for Zoo Break, so that became Swindle 2, and then Framed, and then Show Off, and then Hideout. And in the end, there ended up being 8 books in the Swindle series, but I never planned Swindle to be a series. It just kind of grew into one as I got more and more ideas.
So do you find that you kind of, especially with Go Jump in the Pool, did you kind of find you like writing about sports, or did you kind of like writing about maybe something that happened, or something maybe that you experienced when you were young or even now? Or did you always like writing with sports?
Well, it's a lot of different things. You know, like I love sports. You know, so I've always done, like, sports tend to come back again and again in my books, although a lot of them are not what you would call sort of sports books. So for example, you know, even going back to the very beginning, they play hockey at McDonald Hall. In the Zucchini Warriors, they play football at McDonald Hall. You know, the Toilet Paper Tigers is a baseball book. Chicken Doesn't Skate is a hockey book. Whole Slapshot series is about hockey. You know, so I go back and forth, and I tend to use like sports as an element in my books, but I wouldn't say that I'm just like a sports guy or just a humor guy or just an adventure guy. Like I like to write about a lot of different topics, and whatever the story kind of requires, that becomes the focus of that particular book. Does that make sense?
So is there anything you kind of want to say to inspire people that maybe don't like writing, or to help people that are already writing to become authors?
Well, for sure. I mean, the most obvious piece of writing advice, like the real no-brainer of it, would be just read a lot. I mean, I know a lot of other writers. I wouldn't say any of them are non-readers. But the other thing that I think is important is just make writing a part of your life. Make it something that you do every day or almost every day. And the weird thing for me is, it doesn't really matter what kind of writing. I mean, you could blog, you can keep a journal or a diary. Honestly, I don't do any of those things, but I'm always writing something. You know, always have a story going, a poem, a screenplay, graphic novel, anything.
So when you were writing war stories, did you base this like off of, maybe did you know like a Trevor that really liked war or something like that, or did you kind of just go with basing it off of the war and kind of making people up as it goes on?
Well, it was kind of both things. You know, I've done a lot of adventure series, and the one of the ones that I had a great experience with was I wrote a series called Titanic, about kids on the ill-fated maiden voyage of the Titanic. And what I thought was really challenging about that was, not only was I writing, you know, a story of survival and a story of tragedy, and you know, I mean, the real Titanic story, but the Titanic sank in 1912, right? So you know, it was sort of really challenging and pretty fun to kind of immerse myself in that other time, you know. And so immediately I wanted to try it again. And the first thing that popped into my head was World War II, right? Not as far back as the Titanic, but, you know, still, I mean, we are closer, like World War II is closer to the Titanic than it is to today. So, and all these ideas for writing about World War II. And it was my editor at the publishing company who sort of suggested, you know, that was a long time ago. Can you sort of give the story a connection to today, right? So I sort of got this idea that I would write about, you know, at first I thought it could be a father and a grandfather, but the timing didn't work. So a kid and his great grandfather, right, who had fought in the war. And so I could tell the story today of Trevor and his great grandfather, who go back to Europe to sort of re-experience what he'd been through as a soldier, and also accept this award from the village he helped to liberate. At the same time, I could tell the story in real time in 1944, when Jacob Firestone, right, the 93-year-old great-grandfather, was actually 17, lied about his age so he could be a soldier. So it wasn't really from an experience. It was really to find a way to tell that World War II story, both as a today story and a 1944 story.
Yeah, so I really like how in war stories you flip between Trevor and then like his experiences with Jacob Firestone, and like, but then you also show Jacob's point of view, because like when they were liberating the town, and like Jacob is kind of explaining it, you don't really get to imagine, I guess, if you would say, like what's actually happening. But then in like the next chapter, I like how you like add it so you can like imagine what's happening more than when you're kind of on Trevor's side. So I think that's something that you did well with war stories.
Thank you. I mean, I think what you're doing, you know, you sort of have a moment where like Jacob is talking today about what it was like so long ago, and then you could just sort of switch chapters and you're in the hedgerows of Normandy, or you're in D-Day, or you're in the liberation of Paris, or something like that, and you can just sort of switch from those two perspectives that are really 75 years apart.
So I think a lot of fans of your writing are wondering if you have any books planned to come out soon, or even any books in the works.
Yeah, sure. So my next book, comes out in July. It is called Linked. Obviously, it's done, right? It's all printed up and ready to go. And Linked is actually one of my more serious books. It's actually about a kids at a middle school where there have been I guess you could call it like racist vandalism, right? Someone is painting like swastikas on the walls of their school. These kids are so freaked out. They try to come up with a plan to combat what's going on. Because one of the hardest things about being in a school where something awful like that is happening is you want to do something, but you can't because you just don't know who's doing it, right? No one can catch who is doing this. So what they decide to do is they're going to create a paper chain 6 million links long as kind of a tribute to the 6 million victims of the Holocaust. And the story is kind of where that goes. And on top of everything else, the mystery of who is doing this in the first place. But their school only has 600 kids. So in order to create 6 million paper links, that is 10,000 per kid, right? There's no way that's going to work without a lot of help from outside. So Linked is really that whole story.
So I was doing a little bit of research on you, and it showed that you like kind of like sports, and that it's kind of going back to the question I asked earlier. But when do you kind of find maybe that you like writing while you're kind of like watching sports, like even if you have like the TV muted and just like writing, but also kind of keeping up with the sports?
Well, we're kind of a sports family here, so there's always something on. I don't really write in front of the TV. Like one of the things that I've kind of gotten used to, because don't forget, like I started writing when I was a kid and have been doing it ever since, right? Like my first book came out in 1978, like 43 years ago. I try to separate my work life, right? Like my writing life from my sort of regular, kind of leisure life. But we are always watching sports in my house, and we're big, we're huge football fans. We are basketball fans. We are hockey fans. We watch baseball. We're really into like European soccer, which is because of the time difference, like those games start sometimes at like 7:30 in the morning. So there is almost never a time where there isn't some kind of a sports game on TV in the Korman house.
So is there anything you want to say just in general?
No, I consider it incredibly fortunate that I'm still doing this, right? Because it's just when you think about how I got started writing from that grade 7 English project, like the fact that all these years later, I'm still basically doing the same thing I did when I was 12 years old is, I mean, super, super lucky. So I just want to thank people for reading, because that's, Linked is going to be my 98th book. So if I keep it up, I can't make any guarantees, but if things go at the level they're going, I will publish my 100th book before the end of 2022. And the reason why I'm still able to do that is not because I can write 100 books, but because there are kids out there reading my stuff, enjoying it, laughing in all the right places, thinking about it. So to my readers, I would just like to say, first of all, thank you for watching this interview, but especially thank you for being readers. That's what makes everything possible for a guy like me.
So yeah, thank you so much for your time, and yeah.
All right. And I can say that I'm one of the authors who was featured on Wild Willie's book reviews. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem.
All right.